Hello everyone and welcome to my video lecture series. Okay, so today in our lecture we are going to study in situ conservation, ex situ conservation and the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. In my previous lecture we had seen about the IUCN Red Data Book or the Red List, and we had talked about the conservation categories, right? We had also discussed what was the need for conservation, right? So before we start with our today's part, all those who have not subscribed to my channel and who are watching this video right now, kindly do subscribe, do press the bell icon, okay? And let us get started with our today's topic. Okay, so I will just make a summary of what we are going to study today. So we are going to first of all start with conservation, right? And under conservation we are going to study two types. We are going to study in situ conservation and we are going to study ex situ conservation, right? This is the first part, and this is a very easy part, okay, because you just need to remember the meaning of in situ and ex situ. Okay, you can give different examples as per your knowledge. You can also use the examples given in the book, okay. And then finally we are going to finish off this topic with the Biological Diversity Act. Anyway, so let's start with the first part, which is called as the in situ conservation. Okay, I will write it down over here. In situ conservation. Now this is one of the methods of conservation. What is the meaning of in situ conservation? Okay, in situ conservation means conservation at home. I will write it down over here. I will also explain what is the meaning of conservation at home. So what happens here is, now everybody knows what is the meaning of biodiversity. Biodiversity basically includes all the different types of organisms and species, right? And that is why it is called as biodiversity. So what happens in situ conservation is you basically protect the natural habitat of the organisms. Okay, so suppose take the example of any forest. Okay, let us take the example of Kanha forest. I will write it down if you want. So Kanha forest, which is there, okay, Kanha forest is present in Madhya Pradesh. So this forest, suppose if you want to protect all the organisms, or if you want to protect the biodiversity of Kanha forest, which is present in Madhya Pradesh, how will you do that? So the best way to protect all the organisms and the natural resources of Kanha forest is to guard the entire Kanha forest. Suppose if you protect the entire Kanha forest, so that means you are protecting the biodiversity of that forest. You are not removing the organisms from their natural habitat and taking them somewhere else and protecting them. You are protecting them in their natural habitat, so they are being protected at their home. That is why this is called as conservation at home, or it is called in situ. See, in situ means on site or on location. The organisms are not removed from their natural habitat. They are kept in their natural habitat. They are kept in their natural home, and at the same time they are protected. That is called as in situ conservation. So protecting any natural area where organisms are present, where biodiversity is present, that is called as in situ conservation. See, when we learn about ex situ conservation means that you are removing the organism from its natural habitat and you are keeping it in some other place under captivity and protecting it. Okay, for example, from Kanha forest, if I remove an animal, let us suppose that it is a tiger, and that tiger I keep it in some other place in a zoo, then that is called ex situ. I am not protecting the tiger in its natural environment. So I hope you understand the difference between in situ and ex situ. Is that clear? So I hope this concept of in situ conservation is clear. That is conservation at home, conservation of biodiversity in its natural habitat. Is this clear? Okay, so Kanha forest is one of the examples. Okay, now we have to study about in situ conservation in detail. So let us move on to the next aspects. The next thing that we have to study is something which is called as biodiversity hotspots. Okay, now what are biodiversity hotspots? Okay, now biodiversity hotspots are the areas which are rich in biodiversity, which are rich in different species of animals, plants, and microorganisms. Okay, these are called as hotspots because compared to the other areas of the world, these areas are very, very rich. For example, the Amazon rainforest can be called as a biodiversity hotspot because the species diversity is much more present over there compared to the other parts of the world. Or you can call the Western Ghats of India as a biodiversity hotspot because in that area the species diversity is much more, the species richness is very high. So those areas which have a very rich species diversity, these areas are labeled or they are called as biodiversity hotspots. Now, how many biodiversity hotspots are present in the world? So there are basically 34 biodiversity hotspots present in the entire world throughout the earth. And out of these 34 biodiversity hotspots, how many are present in India? So there are 3 which are present in India. Please remember this. Okay, a question can be asked, an MCQ can be asked, how many biodiversity hotspots are present in the world, how many are present in India? 3 of the biodiversity hotspots are present in India. We are going to see where they are located. Now, what is the importance of these biodiversity hotspots? Obviously, if you can protect these hotspot areas, that means you are protecting the biodiversity, right? And if you are protecting biodiversity, that means the extinction rate will go down. Okay, so that is why it is very, very important to protect these hotspot areas. And it is said that if you can protect the 3 biodiversity hotspots in India, the extinction rate will go down by 30%, 30. Just by protecting the 3 hotspot areas in India, the extinction rate of the world will go down by 30%. Just imagine that. So India plays a very, very important role in biodiversity. We have already discussed this in the last chapter. Now let us see where the 3 biodiversity hotspots are present in India. So I'm just going to scroll on the right side, and here we have the map of India. Okay, I'm going to label the areas which are the biodiversity hotspots. So the first area I'm going to label is the Eastern Himalayas. So this area which I am shading, okay. So the Eastern Himalaya, the Himalayan range basically starts from Kashmir and then it moves right onward. So the Himalayas present in the Kashmir region, they are the Western Himalayas, and the ones which are present over northeast, they are called as the Eastern Himalayas. So this region is called as the Eastern Himalaya region. So Eastern Himalayas are one of the 3 biodiversity hotspots present in India, which is the next hotspot. The next hotspot is also in the east, okay, and that hotspot is called as the Indo-Burmese region. Now this is the border of India, and over here is the country which is called as Myanmar, or which was earlier called as Burma, right? So this area, so I will just rub this off. So this area, if I shade, okay, this entire area, so even this area will come. This area is called as the Indo-Burmese region, or it is the Indo-Myanmar region. This is the second biodiversity hotspot. Again, what is the meaning of biodiversity hotspot? Biodiversity hotspot is the region where biodiversity is very, very rich. Many species are present. And the third one, biodiversity hotspot, which is present in India, is the entire Western Ghats. So if you remember this, you must have studied in school. The Western Ghats are present over here. So right from Maharashtra up till Kerala, these Ghats will be present. So this entire area is the area of the Western Ghats. Is this clear? So these 3 regions which I have shown you on the map of India, these are the 3 biodiversity hotspots present in our country. The Western Ghats, okay, The eastern Himalayas, please remember the eastern Himalayas. When I talk about the western Himalayas is not very rich in biodiversity, so we are not counting that area. And the third is the Indo-Burmese region, Burma. Myanmar was earlier called as Burma. Is this clear? So these are the three hotspots, and if we can conserve these three areas properly, then we can reduce the extinction rate of the world by 30%. Extinction of species. Is this clear? Okay, now let us move back to our topic of in situ conservation. Okay, so now the next part that we need to study is how, in which different ways can we basically practice in situ conservation. So in situ conservation can also be done by introducing the traditional practices in horticulture and farming. So I will write it down, okay, and I will explain that. That is going to be the next point. So next point is going to be introduction of traditional practices in horticulture and farming. Now first of all, what is the meaning of horticulture? Everybody knows what is farming. So there are two words, agriculture and horticulture. Everybody knows what is agriculture. Agriculture is basically growing of crops for economical purposes, and it also includes animal husbandry, where you are basically practicing rearing of animals, poultry, fishery, all that. Now horticulture is a part of agriculture, but it only deals with the cultivation or the gardening of crops. So the science of gardening or cultivation of crops is called as horticulture. Please remember, it is a part of agriculture. It doesn't include animal husbandry and all those other activities. It just includes the science of gardening of crops or science of growing of crops. So what is the meaning of introduction of traditional practices in horticulture and farming? So I will give you an example over here. That example is based in Satpura, okay, which is present in Maharashtra. Okay, and in Satpura there is a tribe, okay, tribal people which are present, and the name of the tribe is called as the Pawra tribe, Pawra. So this Pawra tribal people which are staying in the Satpura area of Maharashtra, what they are doing is they are practicing in situ conservation. How are they doing it? So they are growing all the different varieties of corn, okay, which they can grow. So the corn which is grown in this area of Satpura, that is of many different types. And how do you know that it is of different types? Because the kernel, okay, that one single piece of corn, it is called as the kernel. It is also a seed, that is a monocot, right? So that individual piece of a corn that we can eat, that is called as a kernel, Kernel. So NEL. So basically these Pawra tribal people, they are growing all the different types of corn which are having different colored kernels in this area. So by doing that, what are they doing? They are preserving those crops, right? They are preserving those species. So what is that? That is in situ conservation. It is happening only in that Satpura area. It is not happening outside somewhere. It is not that those crops are taken and they are grown in some other region. No. So that is another example of in situ conservation, that is introduction of traditional practices. So all the varieties of crops, they need to be grown in their local habitat so that all of them are preserved. Is that clear? So I will write down what they are doing in the bracket. Different corn types with colored kernels. Now I don't have an image with me right now, but if you go to Satpura and you see this corn, then you will get kernels which are having different colors. Some of them are having yellowish color, brownish color, reddish color. So all these different varieties of corn you can see in that Satpura area of Maharashtra, okay, and that is done by this Pawra tribal people. So that is also another way of practicing in situ conservation. Is this clear? Okay, so in situ conservation doesn't mean that you are only conserving animals. You are also conserving the plants. You are conserving both the flora and the fauna. Flora is what? Plants. Fauna is what? Animals. I hope that part is clear. Now you must have heard of these different terminologies like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and some of you might have even heard of the word which is called as biosphere reserves. Okay, so we are just going to have a look at that. So let me just scroll down. Okay, I will write down these three words. The first word that I'm going to write down is national parks. Right? Anybody can tell me an example of national parks? Any national park? So there is a Jim Corbett National Park which is present in the north of India, right? Then there is the Sanjay Gandhi National Park which is present in Maharashtra in Mumbai. It is present in Borivali. So that is the example. Then second phrase which you might have heard is wildlife. So I will use a different color so that it becomes easier to understand. The second is going to be wildlife sanctuaries. What are wildlife sanctuaries? Again, example of any wildlife sanctuary that you remember. So the Gir Wildlife Sanctuary in Gujarat. Okay, so that is one of the examples. Okay, and the third word which I'm going to write down is biosphere reserve. Now this word maybe most of you would not have heard of. Anyway, I'm going to explain all these words to you. So now in India, how many of these are present? I'm going to tell you that first. So approximately there are 90 national parks in India. There are approximately 448 wildlife sanctuaries in India, and biosphere reserves are the minimal. They are only 14. So these are the numbers. Okay, so maximum wildlife sanctuaries are present in India, minimum number of biosphere reserves are present, and particularly if you want to know about Maharashtra, then in Maharashtra the number of national parks are only 5. Okay, and in Maharashtra the wildlife sanctuaries are 11. Okay, so this is I have written about the state of Maharashtra. So let me write it down over here. Maharashtra there are 5, and over here Maharashtra there are 11 wildlife sanctuaries. Now what is the difference between these three terminologies? So most of us get confused between national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. We think that both of them are doing exactly the same thing, but just that there are different words which are used, right? Now this is not given in the book. They have not explained the meaning of all these phrases, but I'm going to do that because see, some of the students, they are interested in wildlife. They want to become wildlife photographers or wildlife explorers, right? So for them, I'm just going to add this extra part. So I'm going to tell you the differences in between all these three different things: national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. First, we come to the main differences between national park and wildlife sanctuaries. Now, the first difference is that a national park has a specific border or a specific area. So if you see on a map, then if you see the boundary of a national park, it will be very, very specific. That means only the area inside that mark on the map is the national park. The area does not increase or decrease. It is just like each state, each city has a specific area and it remains the same. Similarly, the national parks are clearly marked on the map. Their area doesn't increase or decrease. Whereas if you compare a wildlife sanctuary, then wildlife sanctuary are also shown on the map, but they are not properly demarcated. So there is no proper border for wildlife sanctuaries, whereas for national park there are proper borders. Okay, there will be a point where the national park ends, but wildlife sanctuaries can increase or decrease in areas. There are no proper exact markings. So that is the first difference between national park and wildlife sanctuaries. Second difference is the main aim of the national parks is basically four things. So the aim of national park is to protect the plants, the animals, that is the flora and the fauna, the organisms, and it also aims in protecting the history and the landscape of that area. So if you are talking about the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, then the aim of that national park is to protect all the organisms in that park, and it also aims to protect the landscape of that national park, and it also protects the history of that park. All these four things are very, very important in a national park. However, when you talk about the aim of a wildlife sanctuary, the only aim of a wildlife sanctuary is to protect the animals in that park. not even plants. So all the organisms belonging to the animal kingdom, they have to be protected. So there is a difference in the aims of both of them. A national park will protect animals, plants, history and landscape, whereas wildlife sanctuary will protect, the main aim will be to protect only the animals. It is not that it will not protect the plants, but the main aim is only wild animals. That is why wildlife sanctuary. The third difference between national park and wildlife sanctuaries is economic activities or even slightest human activities are not allowed in a national park at all. It is not allowed, whereas in a wildlife sanctuary some amount of economic activities of human beings are allowed, only some amount, right? Because see, basically both the areas are where animals and plants are in their national habitat and you want to preserve them, so human activities are not allowed. But in sanctuaries some amount of activities allowed. In national parks no activities are allowed. Is that clear? Okay, so I have told you three differences between national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Area wise, it is not that one of them is bigger than the other. Okay, it depends on which national park or wildlife sanctuary you are talking about. Okay, but number wise, please remember national parks are much less compared to wildlife sanctuaries. Now coming to biosphere reserves. What are biosphere reserves? So biosphere reserves are basically larger areas under protection, and each biosphere reserves has national park and wildlife sanctuaries inside it. Are you getting this? For example, suppose if this is a wildlife sanctuary that I have drawn, right? And this is a national park that I have drawn. Okay, now both these wildlife sanctuaries and the national park, suppose they are falling under this blue area, then this blue area is called as a biosphere reserve. Okay, so biosphere reserve is a much greater area which has some number of national parks and wildlife sanctuaries inside it. So wildlife sanctuaries and national parks are a subset of biosphere reserves. Is this clear? Okay, so that is about these three terminologies. I have told you the statistics related to India, related to Maharashtra. So that ends our part. Okay, now we come to the last part of in situ conservation, and that is called as sacred groves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub this off because we don't have much space on the canvas right now. All right. What is the meaning of sacred groves? We are still studying in situ conservation. Please remember, I have not started with ex situ. What is the meaning of sacred groves? So sacred is anything which is related to God or religion or tradition, right? And groves are forest. So some of the forests are basically protected by the tribal people which stay in this forest in the name of God. So cutting down of trees, hunting of animals is not at all allowed by these tribal people. Even cutting down of a single tree or a plant can be a disaster because these tribal people can take action, because for them the forest, the biodiversity is like God. So these areas which are protected, they are called as sacred groves and they are protected in the name of God. Is this clear? That is why the name sacred groves. There are many examples of sacred groves in India. For example, in Meghalaya, okay, there are hills which are called as, I will write down the names, okay, Khasi and Jaintia hills. Okay, these are present in Meghalaya. Then another example is the Western Ghats. Okay, so the areas of Western Ghats in Maharashtra and Karnataka, these are also included under sacred groves, right? Another example, if you want, is the Aravalli hills which are present in Rajasthan. So all these areas are basically protected as sacred groves, and that is because of tradition, and that is they are revered as areas where God is present or they are worshipped. So no cutting of trees or no killing of animals is allowed, and that area is guarded by the tribes staying there. So that is called sacred groves. And sacred groves are very, very important because sometimes it is not feasible to be, protect all the areas, and consider them as national parks or wildlife sanctuaries. So that is why sacred groves are very important. If sacred groves would not have been there, if this concept would not have been there, many of the species would have been lost. So in India, this concept of sacred groves plays a very important role. Is that clear? So with that, friends, we end our first type of conservation, which is called as in situ conservation, or conservation at home, or conservation of organisms in their natural habitat. Is that clear? So what have we studied under in situ conservation? First, we studied the definition, everybody knows that. Then we studied about the biodiversity hotspots, 34 in the world, 3 in India. I showed them where they are: Eastern Himalayas, right, Western Ghats, and the Indo-Myanmar on the Indo-Burmese region, right? And if you can protect them, you will be able to reduce the extinction of species of the world by 30%. That is about the biodiversity hotspots. Then we talked about the traditional practices in horticulture and farming. I gave you the example of Paura tribe in Satpura, how they are growing different types of corns having different colored kernels, right? Then we talked about the areas which are conserved: national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves. Okay, I told you about the statistics. I also told you the differences, right? And the last thing that we studied is sacred groves. So all these parts are together there under in situ conservation. Now let us study the next part of conservation, or the next type of conservation, which is called as ex situ conservation. So let me write down the heading. This is the second type of conservation, which is called as the ex situ conservation. Now ex situ means off site, in situ means on site, conservation at home. Ex situ conservation is off site, conservation away from home. For example, you are taking the organism which needs to be conserved outside from its habitat, and you are keeping it in captivity in a closed area in some other place. That is called ex situ conservation. Now you will ask, why do you need to do that? Why not continue with in situ conservation? Because sometimes it is not possible to conserve or protect a species in its natural habitat. Suppose if in a forest you are not able to protect the different species which are living there, then what other option do you have? You will have to remove the species from there, keep it in a separate closed place and protect it over there. Is that correct? So that is called as ex situ conservation, or it is also called as conservation away from home. Please remember this. Okay, so this is normally done when the number of the species has reduced to a large extent. Mostly the endangered or the critically endangered species, they need to be protected through this ex situ conservation, because in the wild or in their natural habitat they are not able to survive. Is that clear? Now how can you do ex situ conservation? I will write down some words over here. Okay, so you must have heard about the zoos. They are also called as zoological parks. Okay, then there is something called as the wildlife safari parks. So if anybody has gone on a wildlife safari, okay, they are done in vehicles, right, canters or open jeeps. So those are the areas where wildlife safari is taking place. Okay, so that is wildlife safari parks. One of them is also present in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, if you have gone over there. And the third example is called as botanical gardens. So all these are examples of how ex situ conservation can be done. Zoological parks are zoos. Everybody knows animals are kept in enclosures. Okay, now the thing is, many people who are not aware about conservation methods, they think that construction of zoological parks is illegal, or it is not ethically correct. I will not use the word illegal, I will use the word ethically incorrect or correct. See, what these people say is that you are basically removing the animals from their natural home, you are keeping them in enclosures, in captivity, and you are using them for the human entertainment. That is very wrong. That should not be done. Zoological park should not be built. But see, if you are a biologist, you should know that if you cannot practice in situ conservation in certain areas, then this is the only way out for protecting those animals. if in a forest you cannot protect a particular species of animals, then it is going to die in the forest. So if you want to protect it, the only method left is to take that species out from the forest and keep it in captivity somewhere else. At least that animal will survive. Please remember, the main aim of zoological park or botanical gardens is not the entertainment of human beings. No, the main aim is conservation. Obviously entertainment of human beings also happens, but it is just something which is happening because you have done it. It is not the main priority. Zoological parks are not made mainly for entertainment of human beings, please remember. So please, if you hear anybody saying that zoos should not be built, it is cruelty to animals, it is not. When you have no other way out for conserving the animals, this is the only thing that you can do. So zoological parks are important. If we stop creating zoos, then ex situ conservation will stop, more animals will die naturally. It is better to keep an animal alive in a place which is somewhat similar to its habitat than to let it die naturally and quickly in the open surroundings or in its natural habitat. Is that clear? Okay, so that is about the zoological parks. Botanical gardens are the gardens where all the varieties of plants throughout the country are kept. For example, Ooty Botanical Garden is very famous. Wildlife safari parks are where safaris happen. See, the problem with ex situ conservation is the place where these animals are kept, they are not like their natural habitat. So the animal will not be the most comfortable over there, but it is better than the animal dying quickly in the wild. Is that clear? Also, we have to make sure that if we visit any of these areas, especially zoological parks, please keep silent so that you do not harass the animals, do not feed the animals, do not mimic them, do not make noises in front of them. That is what we can do so that the animals can be comfortable. Please remember this. Is that clear? So I hope ex situ conservation is clear. So in situ conservation, three things that you need to remember are sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and biosphere reserves, whereas in ex situ conservation, the three names you need to remember are zoological parks, botanical gardens and wildlife safari parks. Now in the case of plants, especially for crops and vegetables, there are some things which are called as the seed banks. So I'm going to write it down. So seed banks are areas where the seeds of different varieties or all the wild varieties of crops and vegetables are preserved. So in case these plants are dead in the wild, you can take this preserved seed and you can grow it. So those areas are called as seed banks. Okay. Also remember that in some of these ex situ methods, captivity breeding is also done. So let me write it down, another point over here. Captive breeding. What is the meaning of captive breeding? Just take an example of any zoo. Okay, and in that zoo, if a male lion is allowed to mate with a female lioness and they produce an offspring, that is called as a captive breeding because it is happening inside the zoo. So what is going to happen is the number of that species will increase. Okay, so it is keeping the biodiversity intact and it is also protecting that animal. So that is called as captive breeding. So that also happens. There is a crocodile center in Chennai where crocodiles are bred in captivity, and because of that the number of crocodiles has increased over there. So it is very important to remember this. Captive breeding is also important. Okay, and nowadays this method of conservation, this ex situ method of conservation has become very advanced because of many methods. You must have heard of tissue culture. I will write down these advanced methods over here. Okay, so there is something which is called as tissue culture. What is the meaning of tissue culture? Tissue culture is where from a single cell you can create an entire part or an organ of the organism. You can create a plant or an animal. That is called tissue culture technology. Then there is something which is called as in vitro fertilization of egg. You must have heard of this. What is the meaning of in vitro fertilization? So if you have the male and the female gametes, if you have the female egg and if you have preserved it, and if you have the male gamete, you have preserved it, then you can artificially fertilize it, fertilize both the gametes, or you can fertilize the egg in laboratory conditions. That is called as in vitro fertilization. But for that you will need to preserve the gametes. So how will you preserve them? So there is something called as cryopreservation. So because of all these facilities nowadays, ex situ conservation has become easy. What is cryopreservation? Cryopreservation is preserving anything at a very low temperature so you can keep it for many years. Okay, cryopreservation means temperatures which can be as low as minus 196 degrees centigrade. So you take the male and female gametes of any species, you take the seeds of any species and you preserve it in a cryopreservation bank. It can be kept like that for years, then you can remove it, you can defrost it, you can use it, it will be as good as new. So all these methods help in ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation is conservation away from the natural habitat. If you are doing in vitro fertilization, if you are fertilizing the egg of a tigress in a laboratory, that fertilization is happening outside the natural habitat, and that is called ex situ. You will create a zygote which will grow into an embryo and which will grow into a tiger. That tiger was born outside its natural habitat. So please remember, ex situ conservation is very, very important. Okay, and as we being biologists, it's our duty to actually educate people properly about these things. Many people are not aware and they bring about the animal rights issue and all those topics without understanding how important conservation is. So with that, we have ended the second part, which is called as ex situ conservation. So both the methods of conservation are done, and with that, this entire part of conservation of this chapter has ended. Now let us finish with our today's lecture with the last part, which is called as the Biological Diversity Act. Okay, now this act is abbreviated as BD Act 2002, which is also called as Biological Diversity Act, and which was established in 2002. Now, what is this Biological Diversity Act? This act was proposed by the Indian government in 2002. Now, this was proposed because of something which was called as CBD, and CBD had happened in 1992. What is CBD? CBD stands for Convention for Biological Diversity. See, conservation is like a seminar. Okay, so in 1992 there was an Earth Summit. Okay, I will write it down over here. There was an Earth Summit, and this Earth Summit was in Brazil. Okay, and the place was called as Rio de Janeiro. You must have heard of this place. So in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 there was the Earth Summit which was organized. Many countries participated in this Earth Summit, and India was also one of the participants, and one of the parts of this Earth Summit was this CBD, which was Convention for Biological Diversity. And in this convention many points related to biological diversity conservation were discussed, and this was in 1992, and in accordance with this convention, we, the Indian government, formed this act of 2002, which was called as the Biological Diversity Act. So it is taking all the points of CBD under consideration, and this Biological Diversity Act was in 2002 implemented by the Indian government. Now, what does this Biological Diversity Act state? So first of all, it defines what is biodiversity. And according to this BD Act, biodiversity includes all the animals, plants, microorganisms, their genetic material, their parts, and their byproducts. Please remember, the animals, plants, microorganisms, their parts, their organs, their genetic material, and their byproducts, that is products which we obtain from them. All these are together considered as biodiversity by the Biological Diversity Act. Okay, and what are the main objectives of the act? See, any act has its main objectives, so we are going to write down the objectives. Okay, so objectives of the BD Act, the two main objectives are, the first objective is regulation of usage of natural resources. Okay, so this act basically monitors how many natural resources are used, the quantity, all that thing. So natural resources are not used indiscriminately. That is what this act is trying to do. And the second objective is basically taking a look in the management of ethnobiological resources. Management of ethnobiological resources is the second objective. What are ethnobiological resources? See, biological resources are the living resources which human beings use. For example, all the animals, all the plants, all the microorganisms that we human beings use for our purpose or for our help, okay, or for our survival. These resources are called biological resources. What are ethnobiological resources? So there are many different human races, right? And each type of human race uses these resources differently. Okay, each culture uses resources slightly differently compared to the other human culture. So that is called as ethnobiological resources. Okay, so first thing is to regulate the use of natural resources, and second is get enough knowledge about the usage of ethnobiological resources. These are the two objectives of the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Is that clear? Now, how is this act implemented throughout our country? This act has been implemented by the Indian government. How is it monitored? So there is a system which is called as a three-tier system. So I will see if I can scroll down if I have space. Yes, I have. So there is a three-tier system. Okay, what is the meaning of three-tier system? This system has been implemented so that this act can be regulated at the national level, that is the country level. The act can be regulated at the state level, and it can be regulated at the city level. So there are basically three tiers which are formed. The first tier is called as, I'm just going to write the abbreviations first, I will explain the full forms later on. The first tier is called as NBA. The second tier is called as the SBB, and the third tier is called as the BMC. Now these abbreviations you might already be knowing, but they are having different full forms. I will write down the full forms over here. So NBA stands for National Biodiversity Association. So this is the institute, or this is the committee which take care of the biodiversity issues at the national level. It is like if a matter escalates very high, it is taken to the Supreme Court. Similarly, if related to biodiversity there is something which is escalated, then it will be taken to the NBA, or the National Biodiversity Association. Suppose if it is a state level phenomena or a state level matter, then it is taken to the SSB, which is the State Biodiversity Board. Okay, so you can consider that as a high court. A high court is always below the Supreme Court. And finally, the local courts or the city level matters, they can be taken to BMC, which is Biodiversity Management Committee. Okay, so if you want, I will write down over here. This is national level, this is state level, and this is city level, or this is local. So this is called as a three-tier system, which is used for proper implementation of the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. And please remember, the act has made many rules which are supported by the Indian legal system. And if you want to use any natural resource, any biological diversity, any biodiversity related object for your personal use, you have to first consult these institutes, and only after their permission you can use these resources. If you use the resources, without the permission of any of these bodies, then you can be penalized up to rupees 10 lakhs, or you can even be imprisoned. And this act, this Biological Diversity Act, is not only for the Indian citizens, it is also there for the non-residential Indians which come to India. Okay, the Indian people who are born in India but who are not staying in India, and it is also there for all the foreigners. So this Biological Diversity Act is basically regulating the usage of natural resources. Is that clear? So with that, we end this part of the Biological Diversity Act. So what all we have studied, this is a very theoretical part. You will have to remember a lot of things. So the BD Act was basically passed in 2002. So it started from the Convention for Biological Diversity, which was held in the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, right? And according to whatever was discussed, after 10 years, India made its own Biological Diversity Act, which was in 2002. Okay, and what were the objectives I have shown you? First was regulation of usage of natural resources, and second is getting enough information and knowledge about the ethnobiological resources. Ethnobiological resources are how the living resources are used differently by different human races. Okay, so that was there. Then the next thing is the three-tier system. The three-tier system is implemented in India: national level NBA, state level SBB, and city level or local level BMC, and they are protected by legal rights. They are protected by law. If you break the law, you can be penalized. That is it. So with that, we end our today's lecture. So we have finished with in situ conservation, ex situ conservation, and Biological Diversity Act. So friends, if you like this lecture, if you found it helpful, please leave a comment below. Okay, please put a like and do subscribe and press the bell icon if you haven't done so, and share it with all your friends. Thanks a lot.